the acquisition was done, I had actually spent a couple of years with MakeMyTrip, leading a new products division there. So had spent some time in kind of that big, like public company environment as well. And that was also part of like a contributing factor to saying that, okay, I've done the startup life, I've done this big company life. There is this natural moment to transition and maybe take a step back and figure out like what the next chapter is going to be like.
Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, a podcast that brings to light the incredible stories of those who left the familiarity of home for new horizons. I'm your host, Prateek Panda, always curious and eager to share these journeys of courage and determination. Today, we are delighted to have another Prateek Sharma, join our podcast, a perfect example of the values and spirit that we cherish. Prateek's move from India to San Francisco is more than just a change in location. It exemplifies his bold entrepreneurial spirit as well. Starting as an engineer building early telecom equipment in India, Prateek went on to start MyGola, a travel startup in Bangalore, during the early years of the Indian startup ecosystem, eventually selling it to MakeMyTrip. His journey didn't stop there, and he transitioned to becoming an active angel investor, backing successful startups, and is currently the founder and managing partner of Ahead VC, an early stage VC firm based in San Francisco. Prateek, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Prateek. It's going to be a surreal conversation where both of us keep referring to each other as Prateek, but very excited to be here. It's a great topic to talk about and discuss. The cross borders, off to the valley lives have their own moments of exuberance and challenge. Happy to dig into all of that.
Yeah, so let's jump straight in. What got you to San Francisco?
The straight answer is that my wife got me to San Francisco. And the expressionate version of that story, maybe it necessitates a little bit of context. So I was born and brought up in India, landed up in Bangalore in very early days. The technology ecosystem, the technology product ecosystem, let alone the startup ecosystem in Bangalore in 2002. Started off as an engineer, as we shared, and then in 2009, jumped onto kind of the startup life, which was for the younger viewers of this podcast. 2009 was the time when India had zero unicorns because there was hardly any venture capital around. We probably got our first one in 2010 or 2011. So it was very early days for the startup ecosystem. So started a company in online travel with my co-founder and then built the company, raised venture capital, which took like a whole lot of there's a lot of stories there. We can talk about that. And then eventually sold the company to MakeMyTrip. So while I was on this founder journey, something else was happening in my life. My wife also, we are kind of college sweethearts from IIT Bombay. We've been in each other's lives forever. She had started off on her startup journey as well. As I was exiting my startup, she was in the early days of her startup journey. She had started the company called Springboard. It's an education startup, now doing very well. The company was born in India. In fact, the MyGola office was probably like the incubator for the first 6, 8 months or a year of the Springboard journey. But the parent was starting to see a lot of growth for her startup in the US. And so as a family, we were in this moment where I had sold my company. Now I'm inside this large publicly listed technology company, leading like a new product division. And Parul's navigating her early stage startup life, trying to manage the Bangalore to Bay Area commute. So she would spend a month in the Bay Area and going business there, then come back home. We had a young child. We had a 4 or 5 year old then. So there was that kind of additional level of complexity. Of course, had a lot of family support, as is always the case in India. But really, that was the kind of moment for us, for me as an individual, and then also for us as a family to think about like what the next chapter of life is going to be. And just because like Parallel's company was so early and yet in such an exciting phase, we said, okay, let's make that bet as a family where we move ourselves to the US, to this completely new market, exciting space, both creatively as well as entrepreneurially, and build the next chapter of our lives there.
So I have a few follow-up questions, but before the follow-up questions, I'll give you a
Mm,
piece of trivia that maybe you
mm,
don't know about.
mm,
So back in the day, I was in
mm,
engineering school when you started MyGola, and I used to
mm,
write articles
mm,
for MyGola to get paid like
What?
50 rupees, 100 rupees.
I have no idea about this.
Yes.
This is
So that
amazing.
you remember
Yeah,
you
yeah.
used to have this thing where you would let contributors write articles,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah. We
that's
had a
really
big
cool.
community at that point of
Yeah.
time of freelancers, uh, a big chunk in India, but then also across the board. There were like a few thousand people who would work in MyGola at that point.
Yeah. So that was probably, you can say, the first few rupees or dollars that I made
I'm
thanks to
glad.
you.
Small
So
contribution, but I'm
yeah,
glad.
that's trivia out of the way. But tell me this, right? Yeah. As a founder and you had a successful exit to Make My Trip, you were
Mhm.
also in that zone where you really didn't know what you want to do next.
Mm,
As you were moving towards San Francisco, more
mm,
often than not, people have some sort of a vision and they are like, okay, yeah, I want to do this, which is why I have to be in San Francisco.
yeah, yeah.
How easy or difficult was that decision for you that, okay, maybe I'm guessing here and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe the exit helps you take a step back and say that, okay, I'm comfortable. I can take my
Mm,
time to figure out what's next. There's also this pressure as founders who do well or provide a
mm,
good exit are
mhm.
also always under pressure to continue to do
Yeah,
again. Were
yeah.
you dealing with all of that? Was that going on in your mind? And then coming to a more high pressure situation in San
Yeah.
Francisco, what was happening
Yeah,
behind the scenes?
yeah, that's a great question. Prateek, and lots of layers here. Interestingly, it was an easy decision in the short term, but it was a tough decision in the long term. And easy because for many reasons that you lay out, like having sold a company gave us as a family a little bit of cushion to really step back and say, okay, what does life look like? And again, in the family, like parents' journey was fairly straightforward. It was set and we realized that for her to kind of to springboard and accelerate that we needed to be here. But there were enough reasons as a family to be here. For me personally, there was flexibility. The acquisition was done. I had actually spent a couple of years with MakeMyTrip, leading a new products division there. So had spent some time in kind of that big, like public company environment as well. And that was also part of the, like a contributing factor to saying that, okay, I've done the startup life, I've done this big company life. There is this natural moment to transition and maybe take a step back and figure out like what the next chapter is going to be like. So in the short term, I actually looked forward to the transition. It was like this clean slate, which you often don't get in life because you're always running and always on the treadmill. And because of these a bunch of personal choices, I got this opportunity to like start from a clean slate, which is very exciting. So the first year we landed up here, I intentionally did not take on any professional responsibilities. I actually didn't even think about taking on a professional responsibility because I knew that as soon as I started making plans, then there'd be like a dashboard. I'll kind of measure progress. I'll get stressed out. I said, okay, this is like a clear time. I don't have any responsibilities. I am not even going to plan to take on responsibilities professionally. And instead, I said, okay, let me be like a full-time dad. The first year of the US was the time when my son was five and a half. And uh, extremely fulfilling and positive experience. I think that was a moment when I realized from a personal level, like what being present for your family really means. Because as a founder, you might be present in the same room, but you're carrying so much in your minds and your heads, and you're thinking about the future, you think about strategy, you think about the fire that you put here today, that
Yeah.
even though you're physically present in the room, you're not quite present. And having a clean slate gave me the opportunity to really be present with family, which was quite an eye-opening experience. I used to think I was very present, but I realized that maybe I was like 30% present. It was a big level improvement. So short term, extremely positive experience. Long term, the next few years of when I started thinking about work and professional life and kind of building the next chapter, that was a really challenging time because in lots of ways, founder life just forces your personal identity to get so tied up with your professional identity that when that loop or that connection is severed, like after an exit, it's a really challenging moment. Like I remembered that in the first few years of moving to the US, I would actually think hard about introducing myself to people who didn't know me because I didn't have a clear sense of who am I? Like, am I a founder? Yeah, sure, I can talk about it, but I don't really reflect on me. I'm not like, I don't have any other like professional responsibilities. What/who am I? So like that really rewiring and rebuilding of your own identity, it's a fairly like stressful process, not easy because like in a particular environment, in a market, you know who you are. In a company, you know who you are. But when you land up in a new market, in a new set of people, rebuilding that, that was, yeah, quite strenuous.
Yeah, while you were talking, it reminded me of my move that was also
Mm,
similar. Like I moved here because my wife and she helped me move. It was a no-brainer. Like we got married and I kept doing what Parul was doing. I used to
mm,
spend my entire team was in India and my wife was here in
mm,
the Bay Area. And I
mm.
would spend a couple of months with her and then go back to the team a month. I would travel
Brutal.
sometimes 5 to 6 times between India
Mm,
and the US. And I
mm,
did that for 3, 4 years, and then it started to get tiring.
mm,
But also, I struggled a fair bit in the early years. I think probably this is the first time I'm saying this out loud. That
mm.
there was a fair amount of time where I didn't really know whether I'm doing a good enough job or not. And
Yeah.
people around me, like all my
Mm,
friends who studied the same program that I did, but
mm.
went on to work for these larger
Google,
FANG
Facebook.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were doing a lot better financially, or that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Mm,
And that used to, I made it a lot more difficult on myself. So there was a
yeah.
phase when I used to have a drink every day and
Mm,
without
that's
which I
tough.
couldn't function. Right.
Mm,
I didn't realize then that I'm showing signs of like depressive behavior, but
mm,
I would limit myself to one drink. Not that's any better, but
mm,
it
mm,
became like a thing that I cannot get through 4 p.m. or 5
mm,
p.m. unless I have a
mm,
drink and then get started with my work again with the
mm,
team in India.
mm.
Did you have any sort of community in San Francisco or around San Francisco that you could
Yeah.
count on?
So very crucial. Thankfully, the IIT community, my undergrad class, because yeah, all engineers, at least people who work in the US, I concentrated on the two courses and Bay Area, like the bigger concentration. So that was like a very natural staging community for us, for me and for Pablo as well. And that was like really crucial. So very important in the first years, continues to be super valuable now as well. And I think there's something to be said about and the value of community that we carry having grown up in India, of like how you show up for people. Like my undergrad friends who I had not seen for 15 years, just welcomed me to the Bay Area. We never missed a day. That was very warm. And I think a big part of us kind of feeling or finding our kind of peace here. Interestingly, there was another community which was very valuable for us, and that was the community with my son's school. Because, like, when you have kids, like their parents whose kids and your kids are in the same school, they become it's a community, if not the community for you. And so we landed up in San Francisco in 2016 and we found this really progressive, interesting, creative school in San Francisco called Brightworks. The founder of Brightworks actually he's a fascinating character, Gabor Tali. Gabor's given a TED talk, and the title of the TED talk is 50 Dangerous Things That You Should Let Your Kids Do.
Okay, interesting.
And he has like a whole expansion of that philosophy into the whole education program. And that's where we landed up
Amazing.
at school. It was a small school. And I think being this small school kind of gave us another community to ease ourselves as a family into the US that also in some ways was a non-Desi community. So the IIT group was the Desi community and there was a lot of shared value and a lot of experiences. But the school community was like the non-Desi community and yet very warm and welcoming. That was our, at least for me, like onboarding into the US culture and the Bay Area culture. So that was also like a fantastic community that helped us settle down here.
Tell me, I'm switching gears a little bit and tell
Yeah.
me a little bit more about your path into VC and
Yeah.
how ahead VC started.
Mm.
What was the planning in progress? And
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I'll maybe start in reverse gear. Let me give you a quick snippet of what Ahead VC is, and then I'll also talk about the path into Ahead VC. So Ahead is a very new fund which I started just over a year ago. This is a cross-border fund. We focus on founders and startups who are able to essentially span India and the US and take advantage of the unusual abilities that both the markets offer. So what I specifically look for is founders companies who are able to build in India and sell in the US. At a high level, that's the thesis for the fund. In terms of translating this into like specific categories, I look at a lot at all kinds of B2B software. So whether it's for large enterprises or SMB SaaS, dev tools, and across all of these categories, AI is like a fairly present and significant theme, which is changing playbooks across all of these categories. This is these are spaces that I look at and I invest very early. So really the focus is to come in at the pre-seed and seed stages, oftentimes when there's just a slide deck. In some cases, there's maybe a product and maybe like a proof of concept, potentially one or two early pilot customers, but really early in the company's journeys, and then work closely with founders to support their US journey. The US, like the US journey is for non-trivial one for founders who are not super connected here, and anything which kind of needs access, whether it's to capital here or potential customers, eventually talent, takes a lot of time. And those are really the pieces that Ahead solves for. So quick nutshell, that's what Ahead does. My path to Ahead was, part of it I talked about already, was through this like founder life and then several years of fairly active angel investor life. And again, through dozens of conversations and insights in the angel life to launching Ahead. And here, maybe I'll step back. So when I landed here in the US, because I had a lot of time, and I had these deep relationships from my Bangalore days. The 2002, 2015, 16 period in Bangalore was an explosive time for the startup ecosystem. That was a time when uh, India saw like massive amounts of venture capital kind of flow in, our first massive pool of like large scale, hyper scale companies show up. And that was a great period to be building relationships. And I had those because I had lived that life. So a combination of me having time, India startup ecosystem continuing to grow well, and it was fairly natural to start doing angel investing. There wasn't a lot of thought or planning into it. It was like I was meeting interesting founders. So I said, okay, I like you. Let me write you a small check. That's how the angel investing journey started. Probably wrote the first check in 2016 or 2017 or those. But then over the past 7, 8 years that I've been here, I ended up investing in almost 27 companies over this period, almost all in kind of the India startup ecosystem. That was really like the focus. About half of these companies were India for India. The other half were India for the US market. And this was really the first almost contact with the opportunity and the challenges of the off to the valley journey for these founders. And again, through lots of these conversations, I realized that there is an opportunity in the ecosystem to build a meaningful venture capital business to actually support founders in this journey and hopefully accelerate the next decade of the India to US corridor in kind of the broader India startup ecosystem.
That's great, Prateek. So one of the things that from my past founder journey and raising
Mm.
money, you've answered this a little bit, but for all the founders who are listening who might be interested to work with you,
Yeah.
money can be sourced from a lot of different places.
Yeah.
So more often than not, like when I was a first time founder, I was really chasing who would write the biggest check. But over time, like I learned it with experience that it's not
Mm.
really the money.
Mm.
There is a lot more value that a VC potentially brings in. And you talked a little bit about the whole
Mm.
assimilating from India to the US and so on. Can you
Right.
tell me a little bit more on
Mm.
that and how you are really helping founders from India
Mm.
break into the US market and grow here,
Yeah.
which is, of course, way beyond
Yeah.
just money? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. Because I think only a founder's kind of been through this journey and done gone through a few of these fundraising cycles kind of really appreciates what fundraising is about. And let me take this in two parts. One is like how I advise founders think about capital, and then also about like how do I kind of work specifically with founders in supporting them, etc. Your very first point that Ken mentioned about capital is actually dollars are a commodity. Like anyone's dollars are interchangeable. If you can get $100 from this person versus the other person, is the same $100. And that's actually in some ways true of the VC business model. At some level, like we see the fairly commodity business because all VCs are trying to sell dollars to startups at one level. So the way I advise founders to think about their raise is to think of dollar and function. The brand name VC, like the one who can write the large check, etc., they might serve a function for a startup, or they might not. So, like founders, like really have to think about it of how much capital they need, what do they expect this capital to do? Do they expect this capital to only play the role of capital? Do they want support? Do they want access? Do they want expertise? Do they want intros? There's many things that the investor and including both the angel investors as well as VCs into this pool, there are many things that this broader investor universe can do for founders. And if founders are able to connect that I need this amount of capital, and these are the functions that I need solved or that I need support from, that's a great place to start in terms of almost curating their capital, saying that this is what I want my capital to look like. So that's advice to founders. Now jumping to ahead and like how I engage with founders. I realized again through my angel investing time conversations is founders have a lot of gyan. Like they get a lot of knowledge and advice about building your product and strategies, is that whatever. That's great. Fantastic. Like really the struggle, especially in the India US corridor, is of access. Like anything which needs you to build a relationship before you can unlock that thing takes a lot of time. Like venture capital is like the classical like example of that. That if you have to raise a big amount of capital here in the US, or actually any amount of capital in the US, you have to build relationships. You can't just show up to a VC and they'll kind of write you a check in the first meeting. You have to build a relationship, you have to kind of ability, you have to kind of build a trajectory. That takes time. And this is exactly the same case when you have to land, say, like a large customer. Like no one's kind of going to sign up like a new startup. No enterprise is going to sign up a new startup on day one. You again need to show trajectory and relationship. So the insight for me was that I have to solve, because I'm physically based here in the US, I am much better place to solve for access. And there's three factors that I think about. One is capital. Second is customers, which is either potential customers or advisors who can open doors to these potential customers. And the third is talent. When founders have moved here, they want to kind of start building their teams here. That's the third piece, which again needs some access to local community and talent. So these are two or three access pieces that I'm building out, which I end up working fairly actively with founders. Of course, I have been a founder myself, so there's like always plenty to talk about, everything from like strategy to team to co-founder dynamics. All of those are fair game, and I've had multiple conversations with different founders about different topics. But really, the differentiation or like the hard pieces of support that I'm structurally building for IDC is all about access.
I think that's extremely valuable, and you're doing some amazing work because I can relate to this as a early stage founder. When I moved to the US in 2016, 2017, it was so much more difficult for me than it is now. I know the right people, I know who to ask for help, for
Yeah.
introductions, and so on. And I can almost imagine so many other founders who are trying to move and don't have that access, right? And that can immediately charge you up as well because it helps
Mm.
you move a lot faster. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing
Yeah.
all of this for the ecosystem. Tell me this, at what point do you think a
Mm,
founder should consider moving to the Valley? If they do have business here, they've established some sort of market,
mm.
what is the right time for a founder to move?
As soon as possible without like killing serious relationships or your company. Because, and I talked about both, I think both are crucial because if a serious relationship is in jeopardy, then, and you move here, that's going to drain a lot of your energy and focus. And even though you're physically here, it might not work. So thinking about them is crucial. And so is the company. Like you have to have enough dollars, whether venture dollars or revenue dollars, to support you. And often, like founders, if they've not lived in the US, don't quite realize how expensive things get here, even if you are being super frugal. And so those are the two constraints to think about, like your personal situation, relationships being one. Second is, do you have enough money in the bank to support at least one founder being here? But if those constraints are solved, being here, and of course, third one is the visa or like the immigration complexity. Like, let's not even get there. Hopefully, it's like magically solved somehow. And I have some references for that as well. That's the other constant question that I get from founders. But put all of that aside, constraints are solved. The more, the quickly they are here in the US, the more time they are able to spend in the US. It generates enormous returns in how quickly the company can grow, or how quickly the founder can realize that, oh, this is actually not a great area to be building in, and hence I need to change things. Both of those insights of like figuring out how to grow or figuring out that this is a dumb space, this is like a dead end, I need to pivot, they are worth their weight in gold. And you don't want to be away from your market and your customers, like imagining like this great day of product market fit, then there's some crucial insight which kind of actually present the market, which you can unlock this by here. So as soon as possible without having stuff break down.
Yeah, and I've met a few founders that are counting on hiring this amazing VP of sales that's going to
Never
make them
happens.
successful. Yeah, tell
Yeah.
me a little bit
Yeah.
more about that from your experience, right? What do you think should be the path when a founder is starting to think about moving here? Or more often than not, a lot of times I've also met people who are like they are still
Eh,
with their team, maybe in India or in other countries, but they try to hire a
eh,
VP of sales or a VP of
eh,
marketing in the
eh.
US while they are not present in the US. What has
I've
been your
almost never,
experience?
I've never seen that being successful. It's hard to hire and be successful with your first few kind of GTM hires in the US, even when the founder is physically present here. Even with kind of the local presence, it is hard to hire. If you're not present here, it's almost, I don't know, it's definitely not going to work. The challenge is that, especially like in early stages, um, company itself, and we're talking about, eh, and maybe even as far as Series A, Series B onwards, I don't know, if the companies start like coming here at Series B stage, maybe there's a different path. That's not my kind of day-to-day stage of engagement. I usually work with founders of pretty early. And in those early stages, everything is changing. Like the product is changing, the founders' thesis about the opportunity, that is changing, the go-to-market motion is changing, everything is in flux. And an external exec is not set up to succeed in flux. External execs work well in stable environments. That's why they're called executives, because they can execute. They are not entrepreneurs. Like you are the entrepreneur, you're the founder. You have to deal with this chaos and you have to pull out some insight and find the golden land of PMF. The exec makes sense only after the playbook for whatever you're kind of going after. That is clear. Now that said, founders should get support in terms of bandwidth. Like you can't do everything on your own, but really you have to own the function. You have to own sales. You can get junior people to help write your email or kind of manage your CRM, put in data, maybe set up meetings for you. You can potentially get advisors who can make warm intros for you, etc. But founders have to lead the go-to-market journey till that playbook is extremely settled and clear. And my anecdotal sense is that even after that, like the first few hires that you will get will not work. So you'll go through several people before you find the right fit, even after the playbook. Before the playbook, it's just like burning money.
Yeah, and I think that is consistent with a lot of stories that we've heard firsthand from people who have moved here and started to
Mm,
build or grow teams.
mm,
But even then, as founders, we come here with an
mm.
overt sense of optimism that
Yeah,
the first few
yeah,
hires are they are the ones who are going to
mm,
be the moonshot for us and so on. And that rarely ever happens.
yeah,
You've now come to this sort of a VC role. It's
mm,
busy, days are busy. You have to meet a lot more founders and keep this rolling.
yeah.
How is that affecting your personal life? And do
Mm.
you miss, those that nice break sort of a phase that you had at some
100%.
point?
100%. But yeah, of course, no comparison to that. But I don't think there's lots of ways to look at it. I definitely miss that period was special. And I think sometimes things are special because they exist at a particular point in time. If I was living in that phase for the last 5, 7 years, I would probably be depressed. So there's definitely something special about that particular moment. To be honest, it's a struggle. Investor life is so operationally heavy and like also so external facing that it's easy to, it's a very multi-threaded business. You constantly are thinking about like their portfolio companies, their like journeys for them, interests for them. You're thinking about your own investors. You're thinking about potential collaborators, etc. There's many things all happening at the same time, and hence it is tough to create mind space more than like actual time. There is flexibility in VC life, like you can move your meetings around and create some space, etc. But creating mind space is a much harder balance. And combined with that, the extra complexity of me choosing to work in the cross-border space, which means that, as I'm sure you've living in two different time zones. Like the US time zone is for US people and US kind of business, and the mornings and late evenings are for the India people. So that always has a tendency to encroach on personal time. But I think really what has worked for me is like treating personal commitments as like a first class block on the calendar. When I put like a family block on the calendar, like meetings don't overlap with it. Like that's something like that's a discipline that I'm building for myself. And there's no other way to like really carve out time. Mindspace is still a challenge, but at least having hard discipline around time and time boundary, that's the best approach that I know so far to make sense of otherwise chaotic schedules.
Great, great. I know that you are also a avid reader and you stay up
Mm,
to date with a lot of things.
mm,
What is something that you are reading right now that you find interesting or fascinating?
mm. I read a lot. I like everything from Twitter threads to like side novels or like books on history and philosophy and all of that. Extremely curious, which is also something that you realize that takes a lot of time as well. So
Yes.
that's another contention for time. What am I actually there's like maybe three and in terms of books, actually I've realized that audiobooks work the best for me. I often don't have enough time to sit on a chair and kind of flip through pages, but there's always time when I'm out for a walk or a drive, etc. So there's like these pockets time where I can fit in an audiobook and kind of read through. I am actually of late reading a lot of sci-fi, which is quite fascinating. Interestingly, I feel both a pull towards history and a pull towards sci-fi, which is like a great contrast. You read about the story of the world as it's unfolded, and you read about like potential futures which can unfold ahead. A couple of sci-fi books which have been very fascinating. I don't know if the audience are into sci-fi. There's this fascinating author called Werner Vinge, and I'm happy to share some links, etc. He's written this trilogy called Zones of Thought, which is imagines this universe where laws of physics are slightly different in different zones of the universe, and how different technologies emerge, and then all kinds of both potential examples of intelligence which kind of show up in different ways, as well as other conflicts. And sci-fi actually is also quite fascinating because our world is changing so quickly. Yep. That sci-fi is almost like a case study where you can get a picture of or get a taste of like how our current futures might evolve. Yeah, that's something which is
It's
on the current
interesting
list.
you mentioned history and sci-fi. Just yesterday, I read a quote that said, more people should read history because it'll tell you how terrible the past was. And you should also read sci-fi because it'll give you hope for the future. But at the same time, the past history is going to help you stay grounded. That things are always terrible or things are always bright, right? Depending on where you place yourself,
Yeah.
the past will always be there.
Yeah.
And which means that even today we are going through so much in the world, not to discount the fact that it is difficult times. So
Yeah.
if you compare it with the past, we are still better off. But as we go ahead into the future, these are going to be some of the worst times. And that's just cycle of life, sadly.
Yeah.
But the sci-fi part also gives you the optimism that there's always going to be something brighter as well.
I also think that it like both of these history and sci-fi help you see things. They kind of balance things out for me in some ways. As you said, like there are lots of things which are really bad in the past, but you realize that, oh, maybe human motivation is very similar to how it was in the past to it is now. After seeing the Hamilton musical, I got inspired. I read the biography, and it made me think that, oh, like this desire to create something new, being entrepreneurial, it's like a fairly like a few hundred years ago, people were doing this. People are doing it today, moving to a new country, building something from scratch. So maybe there's lots of humanity which is the same. And similarly for the future, you realize that, oh, like people have all these shiny toys, and yet unless humans, like our biology is changed, you might still have the same motivations. You might still care about status and being superior than the other person or accumulating lots of resources. So it's interesting.
Yeah. On that note, I know we are quickly running out of time as much as I would love to continue to keep this conversation going. I'll ask you one last question, right? You're spending time understanding the markets and, a lot of founder journeys. Are there any trends that you are seeing which is worth noting that can help enable founders from India to be more successful in the US?
So I'll first give you the cliche answer, which is AI. And it's kind of cliche because, of course, there's so much creative energy kind of pouring in here. It's trivial to say that founders from India should focus on AI. But I want to double down on that a little bit because so I was in India in March at this big SaaS conference, SaaS Pune, fantastic event, and I recommend it to everyone who's listening, watching. There were 1,700 people at the conference this year. So very well attended. And through dozens of honest, so lots and lots of founders who are thinking of AI, building AI. But I also got a sense that in India, maybe there's a little bit of skepticism about, oh, is this AI is kind of this real thing. Let me put like a quick layer of AI and maybe get a little bit of sale, but like founders like didn't feel fully bought in to how deeply transformative this could be. And so especially for cross-border founders who are not quite here in the Valley, who are not seeing all the cool demos being built here, not kind of seeing enough of how much entrepreneurial energy is going into the space here in the Bay Area and the Valley, I would say that lean deeply into this new way. Don't go into it blindly. You don't have to just follow the trend blindly, but really understand what's possible in technology, really think deeply about the space that is of interest to them, how this technology might change what they're building, because I do think that like massive disruption is coming here, and founders don't want to be caught up in living in a paradigm which is going to be disrupted completely. They should lean deeply into it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's new, even if it feels a little bit like a bubble, which maybe it is in the short term, but in the long term, very real. And founders should really deeply think about it and building here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Prateek. I think you've shared lots of nuggets of information, lots of your learnings and experiences that listeners are going to find very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and taking out time to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, super fun conversation. And yeah, we'll do more online and offline.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Prateek. And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy, challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.